Hi students. In a previous video we created a duplicate of our enemy and turned it into a vertical based enemy, and I've also had a request to show how we might trigger an enemy to start moving when we want to. So I thought I'd take that same vertical enemy and create a triggering mechanism. As always, this is a way to do this. It is not necessarily the best way, but it works for this particular purpose. So to demonstrate, we have our player here, and it might be a little bit hard to see, but I've created this little platform or little trigger point, if you like. So as my enemy, or sorry, my player walks over that, I trigger that enemy to fall down essentially, and obviously it falls down and goes back up, and it'll wait to be triggered again. So in this particular video, I'm not going to demonstrate absolutely every step. I'm just going to show you the changes that I need to make. So the first thing, of course, is I made a trigger plate scene. So it's very much like some of the others. It's a Area 2D that I've called trigger plate. It has a sprite, which is a very simple red bar, and a collision shape, again, a very simple rectangular collision shape. And I'm able to take that scene and put it into my main scene, being this little part right down here. So again, I could move it wherever I wanted to, but I'm going to trigger just down here. Looking at the code for that, so I'll come back to this line here. I've basically taken something very similar to what we have with our normal enemy, and basically said if the trigger body name is the player, so if the player is what's triggering this, then I'm asking it to change a value in my enemy, which I'll come to in a second. And that, of course, is being done via, not there, sorry, that is, of course, is being done, if I go into the actual scene, by triggering the body entered signal. So the body entered signal runs that script, and that was what we just looked at. Now this enemy run is a value that I've added to that enemy, and I'm referencing it by having a reference to the actual node. So up here, I've set up a variable that I'm calling enemy inside this trigger, and I'm saying that that is going to be linked to or referencing the actual enemy that I've placed in my game. Okay, now at the moment I'm referencing a particular enemy. If you've got more than one, you would have to make sure you get the correct node. But this is essentially saying, hey, enemy is actually representing this particular enemy node. If I look at my main scene, that's the node that it's referencing here. Okay, so if I had more than one that I wanted to trigger differently, I would have to set the right paths. But for now, that means that I can then say, okay, enemy, the variable inside enemy called run, set it to true. So let's see what that actually means. So in my vertical enemy, I added in a new variable of type Boolean. So Boolean means true or false, and I've currently set it to false. Now in the physics process where the enemy is moving, I've actually taken the entire movement and I've wrapped it up inside a new if. And basically I'm just saying if run. And because run is a Boolean, it basically is saying if it's true or false. So if the run variable is true, then it will do the code that we know makes that particular enemy move in its vertical direction. So if it's false, then essentially this code here gets skipped and the character doesn't move, the enemy does not move. And I'm setting it to false at the beginning, so my enemy is not moving at all. But when that trigger comes in and says, hey, set this value remotely to be true, suddenly when this physics process runs, it says, hey, I am true, so we start moving. And that is how we are triggering this particular enemy to start moving. Now, there's one more thing I've added, because if we didn't do this next step, then our enemy would continue moving up and down constantly once it was triggered. I need a way to put this run variable back to false so that it stops again. And I wanted that to happen once it's done a full down and then back up movement. So I basically added this little if statement in here that simply says if the position y, so the position of this enemy, is ever equal to its original starting position in the y direction, because we grabbed this originally up the top here when it first gets created, then I set my run value back to being false. So basically it'll do its full down and then up movement, and at that point this becomes true, so then the run becomes false. So the next step through, it says, hey, I'm no longer true, therefore I don't move again until I get triggered. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Just a couple of lines, a couple of variables added will allow you to trigger an event or an action. In this case, it's triggering the movement of another object or another thing in our game. Have a go at implementing that into yours and see how else you might like to use some form of triggering. Just as a little added thing, I could potentially have made my trigger with no sprite or just a collision shape, so that it was more as my player walked through a space without realizing it even, something happened. So I can use that idea of triggering other things by moving through an area that doesn't necessarily have to have a visual element to it. So it can just be for like a checkpoint. As the player moves through, a checkpoint is created or set, or a power up, or any number of other things. So it's a reasonably powerful idea if you can get your head around referring to another object or scene essentially in your game. So as always, I hope that was helpful for you. If you're from one of my classes, if you'd like some help, please let me know. If you're not, then again, I hope this has made something a little bit easier for you in your game development.